Welcome to the best of first-person episodes from Phantoms and Monsters. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of all future uploads.
Harem Skinwalker encounter in San Juan County, Utah. To start with, I am a white female. I was adopted 7 years ago by a Navajo family, and we've always been close despite obvious cultural differences. Still, I learned about Skinwalkers firsthand, and they've since become an accepted part of my life. I left Utah at the end of 2012 and was surprised to see enthusiasm for Skinwalker stories. The first incident happened to my adopted uncle. He was driving through the canyon area. They live in Blanding, Utah in San Juan County, a spot not quite notorious for skinwalkers, but full of them nonetheless, at night, and got that familiar feeling. It was dark outside, but the moon illuminated the canyon and brush enough for him to see out of his side vision that something was running across the desert night. He was in his 40s at the time, and a police officer, so a full-grown man. He started singing and praying in Navajo, and kept his eyes on the road in front of him. But he was driving at least 55-60 miles per hour, so the shape running through the desert was keeping pace with him despite his high speed. He said that it looked vaguely human-shaped, but paler than any human he'd ever seen. Still, he didn't look directly at it. And despite his singing, he was getting more and more scared. One thing my Navajo family always taught me was that these creatures feed on your fear. This one certainly seemed to. My uncle was shaking and sweating when the running thing picked up speed, outpacing his truck, and then when it was maybe 30 yards ahead of him, it made a sharp right and began to run toward the road. He knew it was going to directly intersect him, and he made up his mind to put his foot on the gas, because being braked out in the middle of that road in the dark alone was a death sentence. So, it got closer, he sped up, and just as the two crossed paths, it jumped onto the road. So he saw it for the first time then. He described it as a skinny man in jeans and a plaid shirt, typical res wear, with a long face and big yellow eyes that looked like cat eyes. His arms were thrown up over his head, and his hands were kind of flying out behind it. The worst part was that its mouth was open and seemed to be disconnected from its jaw. Its chin was just flapping around about a foot below its nose. It leapt onto the road and then just as quickly jumped out of the way of his truck, and he didn't see it again. He prayed the whole way home, and they had a ceremony shortly after that. Another encounter happened to my adopted brother, who is one of the most level-headed and unshakable men I've ever met. He was 30 when this happened. He was at their dad's house, partaking in one of these ceremonies, which happens in a hogan. The rule is that you never leave the hogan alone, because the magic and energy that you make during those ceremonies is kind of like a supernatural beacon, and you never know what kind of creatures you're attracting. Still, my brother was a pretty rational guy and wasn't afraid of the dark. He'd been in the hogan for hours, chanting and praying and all that good stuff, and he needed a smoke break and to take a leak. So against the general rule, he edged out of the roundhouse and out into the night. There was nothing around except 15 or 20 parked cars, all close to the ceremony area. It was a large gathering. So he did his business with no incident, and lit up a cigarette. He was standing there staring off into space when he got that feeling of being watched. To shake it off, he walked away from the hogan, about 20 feet, and scanned the desert. Everything was quiet, except the drums coming from the hogan and the singing within. Just as he was about to shrug off his weird feeling and chuck his cigarette butt, he saw it under one of the vehicles, a dark shape and two shining eyes. The eyes were like animal eyes. They didn't glow on their own, but they had reflective light in them, and they glinted right at him. They were yellow. The creature didn't have the shape of any animal he recognized though. He explained it to me that it was shaped like Gollum, really skinny with a round human head. He was not scared of something that would make me bleep my pants instantly. He walked toward the vehicle and bent down to get a closer look. Dust scrabbled around and he could hear a skittering noise. One bony arm shoved some gravel his way, and the next thing he knew, the creature was gone, and the vehicle was empty. But then he smelled this disgusting, puke-worthy stench, and he got scared then, because that's one of the worst things in the Navajo culture. Bad smells are treated very seriously when they're assumed to be supernatural. So he straightened back up, and then he realized the source of the smell. A shadow fell over him, covering him from behind. He is around 6'2", so this thing he said he estimated at 7.5 feet, at least. He was shivering and didn't move as it approached him from behind, until it was standing inches away. He could feel it, smell it, see its shadow, and then the worst thing, he felt it breathe on his neck. Eric said that it sounded like a horse or cow when it snorts, and its breath was warm. When he looked at his feet, he saw his own shoes, and behind his right foot, a big hoof. So he closed his eyes and started to sing, and right at that moment his dad and uncle got a terrible feeling from inside the hogan. They bolted up and exited, calling his name. They found him shivering outside, too terrified to talk, and too terrified to stop singing in Navajo. It took him months before he shared this with us, and he did so expecting us to laugh or call him crazy. But I completely believe his story. RH.
Creepy incident, possible skinwalker, near Kisatchie National Forest, Louisiana. My friend Mac likes to go solitary camping on occasion, to be one with nature and the things that go along with that. He is also an avid gun collector and enthusiast. He heritages Atakapa's native ancestry. I don't remember exactly when he said this took place, but it was few years back, and he decided to go camping on a whim. He packed his gear, a hunting rifle and .45 sidearm specifically, and headed out into the country onto a vast swatch of property owned by a friend of his. He had full permission to be there. This happened close to the Kisatchie National Forest in south-central Louisiana. I won't be any more specific other than that. Safe to say it's many square miles of forest and wilderness. He liked to hike in pretty deep and camp at a specific spot he found a few trips prior. So he made his way and then set up camp in his usual small clearing for the night. Skipping ahead a few hours, it was now late afternoon when he heard leaves crunching and twigs being stepped on. He assumed it was an animal at first and got up from cooking something on the fire to try to get a look. He gazed in the direction of the noise and saw a man approaching through the trees a good many yards away. He has described his etiquette for dealing with other people in very remote places as always being cautious, as more often than not people he comes across are armed like him. He tries to stay as friendly as possible, but still keeps his guard up looking for any ulterior motives, as you never can tell what some folks are up to out in the middle of nowhere. He'll make chit-chat with them, find out generally what they're up to if he can, and occasionally share a meal, etc. He's never really met anyone nefarious as of yet other than the situation and maybe one other, but that's a whole other ordeal. So one thing that sets off small alarm bells for him is he knows he's the only one with permission to be on this property, and secondly, this guy is not dressed for the location at all. He said the guy was wearing a white t-shirt, short blue jogging shorts, and white socks and sneakers. Mind you, Mac is miles out in the middle of the woods away from any paths, roadways, houses, or anything really. Nobody is going to casually stroll into his current location dressed like that unless they are lost or confused, etc. It was early fall but not quite cool, very normal for Louisiana, so there's a ton of mosquitoes, ticks, and other insects. You're not going to have most of your skin exposed if you can help it deep in the woods. I know that all too well from personal experience myself. So Mac assumes something might be up and calls out, "Hey there, do you need help or something?" pretty loud. Definitely loud enough to be heard. The guy keeps walking forward staring directly at him. Mac is starting to get unnerved, and as I said, I know this guy well, and he's cool as cucumber in a tense situation. Getting more uneasy, as the guy is closing the distance, he gets to his feet and loudly declares, "Hey man, can I help you with something or what?" The guy is 15 to 20 feet away from Mac, now standing at the edge of the clearing and the forest. The guy, looking Mac dead in the eye, speaks and clearly says, "Help me." Mac said he was already starting to actually get worried at this point, because he said the way the guy said this was as if something that didn't know exactly how to talk was saying "help me," or at least that's what he first thought. It did not sound right. The guy, still unmoving, says, "Help me." Again, slightly more emphatic but really just slightly louder. Mac said this is when he picked up on what was truly wrong about this. He said the timbre of the voice was more female and actually sounded like a recording being played back, and that the guy's lip and mouth movements weren't matching up with the phrase. It's like he was just opening his mouth, emitting the phrase, and closing it again. Mac asked, "What do you need help with?" Not daring to back up or move whatsoever. The guy, still standing motionless as well, still looking directly at him, said, "Help me," again, and repeated the phrase another 3 times slowly, but not louder in volume. Mac, now totally unsure of what the hell is going on, interrupts the guy by barking, "Alright, you need to bleeping go now unless you actually need my help. Do you need my help or not?" He continued, loud and firm in tone. The guy didn't miss a beat and started up with the "help me" again, and made as if to take another step in Mac's direction. Mac told me that he then did the only thing that made sense in the moment and drew his .45 semi-auto pistol and pointed it at the guy, telling him again, "You need to bleeping go. I don't care what you want." The guy starts to get more animated and agitated, actually starting to say the phrase louder now over and over, but not stepping closer or backing away. Mac did what he thought was right given his current predicament, assuming he was dealing with an unstable or potentially dangerous individual, and discharged a round into the ground in front of the guy. Now this is where it gets fully batcrap crazy. As the guy stops uttering the phrase, goes silent, and still crook for sure, but Mac gave no indication of falsehood, and told me this multiple times, each time in dead serious demeanor. Yet Mac said the guy backflipped away effortlessly, as if pulled back by an unseen tension coil. He described it as completely humanly unnatural and totally out of place. The guy had just appeared and repeated the same phrase over and over, eventually becoming almost frantic before Mac shot at the ground before him, causing him or it to flee. Mac said he stood there focused on the forest where the guy just flipped into and saw and heard no further movement. It was like the guy had never even been there. He stayed like this as the sun began to set and the normal night noises crept in. As I mentioned before, Mac is a pretty unshakable fellow and actually stayed in the area for the night and next night before returning with no further incident. When he had told me and some other friends about this, of course, we asked many questions. We asked him to elaborate on the guy's speech sounds. He said the more he thought about it after the incident, the more sure he was that it was definitely a female's voice coming from the guy. It was like he or it had heard someone say this and mimicked it like a parrot or other talking bird would. Almost like a lure. He doesn't know what it wanted. Hear it, yea, it might qualify as an it, didn't give any indication to follow or utter anything else. He had reacted immediately to the gunshot, and you know what followed there. He has been back to the property since with no other strange occurrences. The only other minute detail that I can think of is he did remember hearing during the early morning of the first night what sounded like a gunshot off in the distance, and it did sound eerily similar to his .45. He thought he may have heard it again on the hike back out. There are people that hunt in the area, of course, and it could have just been that. He couldn't be sure. Since this incident, and one other he had in a complete different location, he did some online research of the whole Kisatchie area and found many legends, stories, and supposed encounters dealing with skinwalkers and other unnerving bits of Native American folklore in the area. Not to mention mimics and other similar supposed creatures. A lot of his encounter lines up with these tales, but there's nothing tangible to prove it, of course, but even as a skeptic, it does make me wonder about strange things in the remote and untouched areas of our world that can't be explained. TN.
This is Lon Strickler. If you like this program, it would help us if you would give it a thumbs up. Then subscribe and click the bell icon so you get notification when we upload new first-person encounters. We have many more to come very soon. And by the way, if you have a suggestion or an experience of your own, please leave a comment.